So, welcome to my story hour. I'm Kathy Ramsperger. I'm a lifelong journalist, humanitarian, and I'm author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls and the upcoming A Thousand Flying Things, soon, I promise. I'm a coach who founded Ground One and created Step Into Your Story. And I'm here to connect people, both readers and writers alike, who love books. I concentrate on transformational stories of international interest, multicultural relations, and social justice that focus on the connections and sometimes disconnections between people. Our guest today has written a superb Southern Gothic novel on the background of social justice themes and supernatural mystique. Welcome, Robert Gwaltney.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
It's good to be here with you too, Robert. I've been looking forward to this all along. So a little bit about Robert. Today we're chatting with Robert, whose debut novel, The Cicada Tree, is quickly making Robert Southern literary royalty. And I mean that. It's been so fun to watch from the time I met Robert to now, because his books just caught on like wildfire. He's done all this having a full-time job. He serves as vice president of Easter Seals, North Georgia. And I highly encourage you to go to that website and see some of the stories of the children that Easter Seals of North Georgia has helped. And as Robert says, through my nonprofit work, I'm champion for early childhood literacy. In all hours between, I write. And he must have written all the time in between. He's published in the Signal Mountain Review, the Dead Mule School of Southern Literature, among others. He's fiction editor of the Blue Mountain Review and writer in residence at the Pat Conroy Center. He's from Cairo, Georgia. My people are from near Augusta, over the South Carolina line. And it shows in his voice and his themes as a writer. He loves art and music and literature and the beauty they bring and that he brings to the world. He also loves dogs, and he lives in Atlanta in what looks like an antique-filled mansion. I am not sure about that one, but it's just beautiful, with his partner, Tim. So we're really glad to have him here with us today. A little bit about the Cicada Tree, and then we'll launch into questions, because I hope I get to read an excerpt. The summer of 1956, a brood of cicadas descends upon Providence, Georgia, a natural event with supernatural repercussions, unhinging the life of Annalise, an 11-year-old piano prodigy, a little dyslexic, beginning at play with her friend Etta Mae, rapidly spreading out to the whole town. During a visit to the Mayfield's plantation, Annalise encounters Cordelia Mayfield and her daughter Marissa, both of whom possess an otherworldly beauty. A whisper and an act of violence perpetrated during this visit by Mrs. Mayfield all converge to kindle Annalise's fascination with the Mayfields. Annalise's burgeoning obsession with the Mayfield family overshadows her own seemingly ordinary life, which is anything but ordinary if you read the book. But that's the way she thinks of it, because ordinary is ordinary till you know different. Culminating in dangerous games of manipulation, setting off a chain of cataclysmic events with life-altering consequences, all of it unfolding to the maddening whir of a cicada song. That still sends cicada chills up my spine, Robert. Oh, yes. So most of the reviews, which are long and full of praise, all say that the Cicada Tree will go down in history with the best of Southern Gothic novels. And so I don't have time to read all the hundreds of them, but just trust me and go to Amazon and Goodreads and read them yourself and buy the book. So I'll read mine. There's a sentence in the Cicada Tree that most aptly describes the seductive language of this pure Southern Gothic novel, which is Robert's debut, but will surely pave the way for many more of his novels. Lush, languorous consonants and seductive vowels. The sound turned my skin to shivers. So says protagonist Annalise, while Miss Cordelia Mayfield's thrall, just before the book's biggest mystery is unveiled. The voice and verbiage of this beautifully written book sent shivers up my own spine, so much so that I wanted to linger in every sentence. Not only that, but the author uses every single one of his senses, these senses, to make the book, and its macabre, intricate, electric setting and all its characters come alive. It's buzzing with life, and the characters sizzle off the page. The plot is as winding as a Georgia creek and yet draws to an extremely satisfying conclusion. The complexity of each character and all of their darkness and light, except Etta May, maybe, who I think of as an earth angel, is stellar. And you'll never look at cicadas and fireflies or any other creature lurking in the dark, or for that matter, shining from above, the same way again. Make your way back to the writers of the South who knew how to tell a story of spirits, sins, and even sadism, all while making you love the experience. You may want to read it again to catch all its nuanced depths. I know I did, like you do with all great literature, because you'll be as enraptured by that Mayfield shine as Annalise. Yay.
That was one heck of a review. Thank you.
Well, it deserves it. I love reviewing these books that I know the author and I also love the book. It makes me so happy. So before we get into the whole plot and craft of the novel, Robert, there are two words that keep coming up in just about everything I read about you. And that the first one is truth and fiction. And the second one is hope. And I really enjoyed listening recently. I hadn't heard this one. One of your first interviews, I think, on the business of music and poetry. And you spoke about how your life informed your writing. And I'd like you to touch on that before we begin talking about the book.
Oh my gosh. And that was one of my first
it was so real. It was just real. I loved it.
The book, I don't even, I'm trying to remember if I even had a publishing contract at that
I don't think
point.
you did.
I don't think that I did. I was just
manuscript.
That was maybe like 3 years ago, and I was terrified.
Well, it doesn't show.
So
you just answered the questions like a pro. And what was obvious to me is that if I had heard this before I even knew you, I would have thought, wow, this man knows how to write. It's there. It's totally there. So how did your life inform your first novel?
You know, it's interesting. There are things that I figured out along the way. The subconscious is at play so much when you're writing. I think you go into it with certain intentions. You think, I want to tell this story and I want to cover these themes. And sometimes there's almost this sort of if the planets align, you're in this sort of transcendental state where sometimes magic happens. You just sort of lose yourself, in those pages. So, and I'll share a little something at the tail end of this response regarding my life and how it sort of played into the themes. So the Cicada Tree started out, it was going to be a totally different book, and it was going to take place in the 70s. The protagonist was going to be an 11-year-old boy, and his mother was an adult Annalise Newell. And I
Mm,
was so fascinated. First of all, I felt like when I was writing that story that I was writing too much of myself, and I wasn't comfortable doing that.
I totally
So,
get.
so I began to talk to Annalise Newell, and ask her what she must have been like as a child, because she was so fascinating to me. She was making these really awful parenting choices. And so she, about the third or fourth chapter in of the original project, she just seemed to me to be the protagonist of the story. So I tell the story from the point of view of an 11-year-old girl, and I'm not you know, a girl. I might be an 11-year-old girl on the inside, but I think that if I were to dissect psychologically how my early life experience played into this book, I think that some of it has to do with yeah, all of the women in this book have something remarkable about them. Annalise, is the piano prodigy. She's able to taste and see music. Etta Mae, who's her 10-year-old friend, who is a young Black girl, has this operatic voice that would be classified as a coloratura soprano.
Ooh,
Um, the Mayfields have this supernatural beauty about them that's known as the Mayfield shine. And I mean, growing up, as a young boy, and I'm a boy of the 70s and a teenager of the 80s. So I grew up, I've spent all of my life in the South, almost all of it in Georgia. But I grew up in a small town called Cairo, Georgia. And I played differently than the other boys. I wasn't like the other boys. So the way that I moved, the way that I talked, my interests were just a little different. And I had a
mhm.
lot of girl friends growing up. All of my, as a boy, I always connected emotionally with my childhood girlfriends and the women in my life. But I think that, part of, feeling like I was sort of on the outside looking in and sort of like living life in the corners. And there was some bullying that went on when I was a boy. And I think that most children, in order to escape that, imagine themselves having some remarkable talent or skill, and or super or perhaps be a superhero in some way. And I
For
think
sure.
that, though I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, I think that probably I would say that that's how those early influences in Cairo, Georgia, impacted the story in some way. Also, and I didn't really realize this until the novel had come out, and I was on my way home to South Georgia, to Cairo, Georgia. There was going to be an event at the Roddenberry Memorial Library, and it's a library that I went to when I was a boy. I went to that library all the way through high school, where I would do all of my
Oh, those are
high
so
school
special.
papers. So we had an event there, and the author Kimberly Brock, and she has an
Mm,
amazing novel out now titled "Lost Book of Eleanor Dare."
right.
And she and I were messaging back and forth. Tim was driving, and I was sitting in the passenger seat. And I'd shared an early childhood experience, an experience of loss. And so I'm the oldest of four boys. There was a sister after me who was born with spina bifida, and she died. I was four, and she was not quite two.
Mm,
And she said to me, she goes, "Oh, I understand now why you made the choices that you made in the book." And and I was stunned. I thought, and she didn't even have to tell me what she meant. I said, I thought to myself, when I wrote the cicada tree, I wrote a story about sisterhood.
right.
Yeah. So I
Right.
think that early loss really, I think writing this book was a way that I could explore what a sister might have been like, through Annalise, through Etta Mae, through even the challenging Marlissa, through Jane and Virginia Fenton. And I realized too, I think that in a way, when I meet people, I'm always, women, I'm always looking for sisters in some strange way.
Mhm. Well, you're artistic and you are you're just charming, and I would think any female would, a child or otherwise, would have a friend in you. That just comes through. So I'm not surprised, because um I'm not surprised you ended up writing. And I also think that loss can spur the muses, sort of. even if it's years down the road. My mother had a stillbirth when I was 2, and I took out the backstory, but Diana's backstory, she has a sister who's named Mary Ann. This particular sister was named, because she was the stillbirth, Sarah Stadman. But I've always wondered what the family dynamic would have been if she'd been alive, So I get that.
Yeah.
To have your sister there and then lose her, that's more trauma.
It's interesting. I think that I wouldn't be the writer that I am today, and perhaps not even have been interested in writing if I hadn't had those early experiences.
Mhm.
I think most artistic people sort of live on the fringe of, we don't always feel like we fit in. I think it's those that separateness, that lonesomeness. I think that gives us an intuitiveness and a worldview and a sensitivity to be able to tell stories.
And our characters become our friends, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Family.
Right.
It's hard to let them go.
Oh, I totally know. I totally know. And yeah, I'm so excited for your second, which I'm assuming will not have these characters in it.
No,
I know that step forward, right? I know how hard it is.
yes,
I'm in the
it
middle of
is.
it now.
So I answered your first question. I went around my elbow and my knee and my ankle to get us there.
You did a great job.
Mm.
That's the kind of interviews I love, because you ask a question and then you hear the story, right? And I learned things about you I didn't know. So thank you very much. I've got a few questions I've wanted to ask you for ages. I'm sure you do a great job on film. You might not know this, but you're a method actor through and through. And I'm wondering if you consciously employ that when you're writing characters and dialogue, because your dialogue is just so, I know it's rhythmic, I know it has Southern voice, but it just leaps off the page and it's so well done.
Thank you.
Do you inhabit your characters?
So it's interesting. You said you referenced the method acting, and I jokingly said not long ago that I'm a method writer. I
Cool.
really do.
I think
So
you are too.
I do. I think I do embody all of the characters, and I spend a lot of time. I mean, I'm always I'm always working on the project, even if I'm not at the computer. I'm always thinking about it. In the drives into work, at home. When I'm alone, I mean, I'm talking to myself and I'm having conversations with the characters, and I'm truly there as much as a sane person can be. um, Engaging with the characters. So I do try to figure out a way, to the best of my ability, to understand and respect all the characters, even those that have villainous tendencies.
Mhm. You do. You do. And it's tough to write a Southern Gothic without plenty of characters who have huge flaws, and you do it really well.
Thank you. Well, I have my own share of huge flaws, so it's not so hard to put them in my
Oh, well,
character.
me too. Don't we all? But some people don't recognize their flaws at all, right? So I think
Well, you
I
have to
think
be
I
self-aware, don't you?
self-flagellate with mine, but oh, well, I think I'm proud of myself that I saw that, because um, my friend is deceased now, but he took me to a method writing class because he was a playwright. And I kept thinking, well, first of all, it was incredibly enlightening. But second of all, I thought, well, I already do this to a certain degree, but it helped me, right? And that's why I immediately saw that you do that too. Another thing we have in common is our penchant for Dickens. My favorite's A Tale of Two Cities, and you mentioned Miss Havisham a lot. And obviously Jane Eyre, which every Southern Gothic author, I think, grew grew up on, really.
Yeah, it's your first introduction. I mean, it's a precursor to the Southern Gothic. So you
Mhm.
do, I think if you write Southern Gothic, you have to, if you don't love the Bronte sisters, you have to at least respect them.
Right. It's true. It's true. Um, so do you have a favorite Southern Gothic author? Because I know you like Dickens and the Brontes, but you
Yeah,
don't have to say, but I
it's
just
hard to
thought,
say. I I think that early influences, I can share early influences, and it's hard for me to have a favorite
I know
sometimes
I'm
of
the same.
anything.
I'm
It's
the same,
hard.
especially
Uh,
books.
yes, uh,
Ta-da!
Truman. I know you go. There you go. Truman Capote's Other Voices, Other Rooms, which was his debut novel, was Southern Gothic, and of course, I'm certainly was drawn to that
Mhm.
as a boy from a Southern perspective, and of course, it goes without saying that I'm a huge fan of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. I think that's probably as close to perfect as a novel can be.
Mhm. I agree because uh, I I was in a conference last week and they were talking about books that you forget and books that stick with you. And I started thinking which book stuck with me, and that's number one. It's I remember every scene and every piece of dialogue, and it's just amazing that way. That's the making of a good book, and your book's going to be remembered too.
Yeah, thank
So,
you.
so let's talk a little bit about Halloween since we're so close to it. We're talking about Southern Gothic and death and our Southern people and cemeteries and costumes. What do you think it is about the South, or do you agree? Because I think this, you might not, that makes it such a ripe setting for Gothic literature and ghost stories,
Well, I think
magical realism.
sure. So, I mean, I think that every place is special, but I think that what's so unique about the South is the climate. You know, the sheer loveliness of the place. You know that summers can be so oppressive, and of course, the language is is unique. But I think that what lends it to being fertile ground for Gothic storytelling is just the troubled past of the South, and the Southern Gothic, by its very nature, really is trying to work out and find some balance between that idyllic myth of the South and a geography that has a very challenging past through social, racial, and economic oppression. So
Mm,
it's trying to find that balance because at the end of the day, that's really what Southern Gothic tries to work out in some way through the misfit characters, the elements of the grotesque, the elements of the supernatural. And of course, I married. Um, I say that the Cicada Tree is a Southern novel with Gothic tendencies and elements of magical realism. Because I don't know that I captured the textbook definition of Southern Gothic, but I think that it has tendencies, and I sort of cross pollinated it with magical realism. So when I set out to write the Cicada Tree, I really didn't give any consideration to what might be commercially viable, which is probably a stupid thing to do.
no,
But
I
I
did
thought
the
if I
same thing.
write all of the things that I love, maybe there'll be other people who'll enjoy it too.
Well, I think you got a hit whether you set out to have one or not. So, I think it's because it rings so true to so many of us. And for me, it brought back my childhood. My grandmother's name was Anna Lee.
Anna Lee.
Everybody called her Annie Lee because it was the South, but her birth certificate was Anna Lee. And so I was fascinated with Annalise immediately. And see, I'm even calling her. You could tell I was fascinated. So I'm wondering about her supernatural gift. And I thought at first it was telekinesis, and it's okay if it's a secret. But did you have a certain superpower in mind for her or a supernatural gift? that and did what this might be my ignorance, but it was there before the cicadas came, right?
Mhm.
But then they just enlarged it, right? I'm
Right.
correct.
So in a way, so first of all, what with Anna, I didn't. It was maybe I was maybe 3 or 4 chapters in when I realized that I just wanted to introduce the elements of magical realism. There's something that happened, and I forget the exact moment that I knew that that's the direction I needed to go. So I for Annalise, of course, she is a piano prodigy. Her father is a honky tonk piano player, and he thinks that he's the one that he believes that it's he who taught her how to play. But I think she says early on in the book that she always knew how to play where her fingers should go. She always knew how to play way down deep, even before she first opened her eyes to the world. So she came into the world with a musicality about her. Then I took the condition synesthesia and I turned it supernatural. So she's able to taste music. She's able to at some point see music. And really, to answer your question, so the cicada plague really comes about as a result of Annalise and Etta Mae's special gifts.
Mhm.
You'll find out that Etta Mae actually sung up a storm.
Right. Asking you questions about the book it's always tough for me because I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah,
And in a book like this, I really don't, there's a lot to give away. Um, so in a way, the women interact, they're girls and women, but the females all interact, and that kind of creates the perfect storm, along with the cicadas.
yeah. I
Correct?
would say that the inciting incident of the book is in the second chapter when
Mm,
Annalise first meets Cordelia Mayfield, and there's this sort of violent interaction that occurs between the two of them, and it's that initial interaction that stirs obsession inside Annalise, and it really does set Annalise down this path, which ultimately culminates in this plague of cicadas in the third act. So
God,
it is this series, it's this uh, the relationships of these women and these manipulative games that they play,
yeah.
utilizing their extraordinary abilities, which really is almost their the end of them in a way.
Well, it is almost. Um, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for that explanation. I probably was 3/4 there, but I'm so excited to know what I was correct about, and you filled in the rest of it without giving away any spoilers, I believe. So that's an art in and of itself.
It's hard, isn't it, to not give away spoilers?
Really hard. Um, so let's talk about, it's coming, the social justice contrasts in your novel. Um, your novel is interesting because so often social justice novels has contrasts, like my novel has, they couldn't be more different. And so many novels have the protagonist and the antagonist in a social justice way. But yours begins in a home with a family, and it might not be bloodlines, but it's a total family unit. And in this family, you're contrasting uh, race and economic disparity, and even gossipers and those who are gossiped about. I love that. I came across, I'm decluttering my basement. I came across this recipe from the newspaper, and on the back of it, it was 1956, by the way. On the back of it was a church-going woman's column, which was obviously weekly, about gossips, condemning the gossips. Um, so I'm wondering if you started with one contrast and they led to the other contrasts, or did the characters just lead the way, discovery after discovery? Did you know you were going to be writing about these themes when you began? Did it evolve?
I didn't set out to tell a story about
Mhm.
race relations. I think that more I had a sense that I would certainly be talking about socioeconomic disparity
Mm.
amongst the classes. You've got Annalise Newell, and she and her family, are close to poverty if they're not, they're on the brink of it. And then of course you've got quite on the opposite end of the spectrum, the very wealthy Mayfield family.
Mhm.
And there are a couple of black characters that are in the book that are prime secondary characters. Etta Mae, who is Annalise's 10-year-old friend, and Etta Mae's grandmother, Miss Wessie.
Mhm.
So I didn't feel comfortable. I don't feel qualified to tell a story, or I don't know, qualified or really comfortable at this point to tell a story about race. And it happens so frequently in Southern novels that I felt like there've been other people who've done it much better than I could hope to do. Sue Monk Kidd did it so artfully in The Secret Life of Bees.
Right.
Um,
Very true.
Mark Childress touched um, on elements of race in oh my gosh, Alabama. I've just totally just lost
Okay.
the crazy in
Crazy
Alabama,
Alabama.
crazy in
Oh,
Alabama.
yeah.
But I did know, I think that my personal experience was that of disparity in social class. I grew
Mhm.
up, and I was fascinated. I think it's my fast. I grew up in a comfortable middle class existence, but I, like Annalise, was always so fascinated with those people whose lives that I perceived to be greatly different from my own. So those individuals who might um, be living in glamour and wealth, I was always fascinated and drawn to that. So I pulled on that from my personal experience.
Well, we were talking just slightly before we came on, and what you do is tell a story about a reality that exists, and it's very difficult to tell a story that doesn't include several races, several everything. And I think that's the best way of talking about it without um, being a preacher or something, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's not up to us as writers.
sure.
It's telling the story that could have really happened. And two things I even inadvertently left out: mental illness and alcoholism.
Hmm.
I mean, those are in there too. So, well, I just want to commend you on it.
Thank you.
Basically, you've told a really compelling story, and I think people may see all of those things differently as a result. At least that's my hope.
Hope so.
Um, so you've answered some of my questions. Is there I'm gonna get on and check, and maybe while I do that to see if there are other questions, you could tell me whether, if there's a scene that you haven't been asked about that just really spoke to your soul as you wrote it or after you wrote it. I'd love you to tell us about that, especially if it's one you haven't been able to talk about in other ways.
I mean, I've talked about this a little, but so the epilogue in the book is not
Uh-huh.
original to the manuscript. I wrote that so the last chapter in the book, and I love the way that I ended it with the last chapter. It's dark; things aren't necessarily tied up into a pretty package. But I was stressing about whether or not the book needed a few extra beats. If most readers with different tastes might like a little bit more. And I wrote, so I was stressing, I was in the midst of revisions, and I reached out to the publisher. I said, I really think maybe I need an epilogue. I think that most readers would like to have a little bit more beyond the last chapter. Would you be open to taking a look at it? So they said yes. If it works, we'll be happy to put it in. So I wrote it, over a period of a few days. It was just really an emotional experience writing that epilogue, and I'm very proud of how the epilogue turned out. And for me, I think, you start out your journey as a writer with the book being one person, and when you type the end at the end of it, you're quite a different person.
Right.
And so it was
It
exciting
changes.
to, yeah, you've changed so much. The world has changed. You've changed. We hope we're even better writers, at the end than when we were at the beginning.
Right.
So it was wonderful to be able to have the opportunity. So it was sort of like the culmination of that full journey of writing this book, to be able to sort of put that final period on the end. So I love it. It's interesting. People have different takes on the epilogue, exactly what happened to the characters. And so it's been fun to listen to some of the readers' interesting takes on how the book concludes.
I love the epilogue. It didn't surprise me. It didn't
Good.
surprise me. Mm-mm. And I can't say any more
I
because
know you can't,
yeah,
and that's the thing. I can't even. I love the epilogue so much, but there's nothing from it I can read
right, right.
because there's so many spoilers, and
You'll
it's a
just have
case.
to save it for the next go round with book number
Yeah,
2.
yes, I can maybe read it, on down the road for people. But I
Yeah,
do. I was very proud of the epilogue.
it's really well done. I understand why. So, the only thing that I can find is Susan. And hi, Susan. Thanks so much for joining us. She says, Robert, I really appreciate your discussion of the loss of your sister and the ways you see it informing your writing and your life. I know about Susan's manuscript, and I understand why she's saying that. Um, I think you've just it's validation or confirmation that you're on the right track. Perhaps, Susan, tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. And she also says, other than your method acting technique of inhabiting your characters, what do you use to build your strong dialogue?
Dialogue is so important,
Yeah.
and I've always been a very active listener, and I'm an eavesdropper. I love to hear conversations that are going on around me. It's hard to say. I think that there's a cadence to the dialogue. I think that if the dialogue should move the story forward, it should serve some purpose, and it shouldn't just be just some matter of fact bit of conversation. I think these sort of have to pace um, the exposition and balance it with the dialogue in such a way that when someone does speak, that it's going to be something said that's very interesting. And that's my personal take and philosophy on dialogue.
I
But I
totally
think that from a method perspective, I will record myself speaking the passages, and then I'll play it back, and I'll listen, see if anything hangs me up. So I'll speak it out loud, I'll record it, and that really helps, I think, um,
Do you
with
read
being
your
able to
whole
hone
book
it.
aloud, or just parts of it?
I think that by the time that I was done with the cicada tree, I'd read the whole thing aloud in bits and pieces, certainly.
Yeah, you can usually tell if something doesn't fit when you read it aloud. Not all the time, but often. And uh, the other thing you have is, you said cadence, but there's such rhythm in your dialogue. But it's realistic. Sometimes there's rhythm and it's almost ethereal, like
Mhm.
in the clouds. But your dialogue is very real, but it's also it's like beats, right?
Thank
He
you.
said, she said, she said, he said.
And
Um,
Southern dialogue is hard, Kathy. I didn't write in dialect, but what I wanted to do, because you can Southern dialogue can go bad quickly, very hokey and
Mhm,
stereotypical. And I
mhm.
didn't want to use traditional manners. I wanted to hint at Southern dialogue without hitting the reader over the head with it, because it can be very hard to read, when you drop consonants and place apostrophes here and there. It can just be really, it can really pull a reader out. And I respected all of the characters. So I wanted them all to be interesting on the page, and I wanted to respect them with their dialogue. So I did spend a lot of time, even I tried not to utilize trite Southern expressions, and I tried to sort of create my own in such a way that they were believable. You would think, oh, that's a Southern colloquialism there. So I tried in a way to reinvent Southern dialogue in a way that we've not been hit over the head with through the years. That was my hope.
Well, you succeeded, because I I can't tell because it was before both our times, but you might not have hit on the exact cadence of the '50s in the South because television has changed the Southern accent.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
um, but and I've been out of the loop for so long and married to a Jersey boy, so um, my accent's changed. But um, to me, it evokes the way Southern people today speak. I, it didn't take me out of the story at all. So yeah, great
Good.
job.
Thank you.
Um, so what I'd like to do is ask about advice for any author who's found a publisher for their just found a publisher for their first, or they just found a new publisher for their fifth or their 10th, and they're on that climb to the top of the mountain, so to speak. What would the Robert in, say, December 21, what would Robert in October 22 say about the whole experience? Because you've gotten such success and quickly, and I'm assuming there's juggling and you've got a full-time job and you're in your Easter Seals office right now,
Right.
for instance. So I know that's going to help somebody out there.
I think that, I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know going into it, and there's still a lot of things I have to learn. I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
I think that you want to set reasonable expectations. I think everyone would love to be a New York Times bestseller. Wouldn't that be lovely?
Mm.
But I think that for me, my goal was, this first book would be just sort of an investment of my time, and I would do it. I want to do everything that I could do to try to give it the best life possible. And so early on, I knew that I wanted to build a humble readership, and I would like for it to sell pretty well, and for people to say some nice things about it, and maybe win an award. That was my hope. Um, and I believe that those are reasonable expectations that all of us can have. What do you think that you can reasonably do? I'm a debut author. I'm coming up with a small press. I've just, the last couple of years have tried to begin to build a platform. So I think that it's very important for debut novelists to have reasonable expectations. And when it's
Mhm.
all said and done, what I feel is that this whole experience, I've been so fortunate that I've been able to exceed my initial expectations. So it's been a lovely journey.
I think I know as you approach publication, you talked online in social media a lot to Adam A. And I think she's clapping and cheering right now, or maybe singing.
I hope she's singing.
Because well done. Um, so uh, I'm going to also ask um, what if we could have just a tiny peek about your second novel or a tiny peek into your work
Sure.
at Pat Conroy Center, either one or both, and what's next?
So on the topic of the Pat Conroy Center, I applied for Pat Conroy literary residency for the fall, and I was very, very excited to have been awarded that residency. So I actually will leave. I'll head to Savannah. I'm going to fly to Savannah on Thursday. I'm going to drive to Beaufort, and I'm going to be there until November 3rd. So I'll have an opportunity to participate in the Pat Conroy Literary Festival. I'll have some time to write, have some time to meet some lovely people while I'm away. So I'm really excited about that. I am at the beginning of a new project. The working title is, I'm calling it Sing Down the Moon. And it takes place in 1931 on a isolated Georgia coastal barrier island. I'm calling Good Hope. Doesn't really exist, but it's, it might be a place sort of kind of like Cumberland Island, one of those places. And it's told in first person from the point of view of a young girl named Leontine Sky. She lives on the marsh with her mother, and she envisions a life for herself away from Good Hope and away from their family tradition of tending this mythological tree that's been named Damascus, a tree that her mother Eulalie Sky refers to as a haint trap tree, a tree that captures ghosts from across the river. So that's sort of the 5-cent version. I have a
Oh,
good sense of
well,
what I
that's
want the story
huge.
to be.
That's huge. I'm so excited that you're keeping those magical realism and ghosts. Yay.
You know what? I love a good ghost story. I love ghosts.
But
And ghosts really are, really are memories for the most part, and you can use them. It's such an interesting literary device.
I'm wondering if you have a favorite costume or character, since it's Halloween, that you played or dressed as. And I'll tell you who I dressed up as that I loved the most.
So coming along, I guess my prime trick-or-treating years as a boy, I guess it happened to me back in the 70s. And we would go, there was a store called TG&Y, and you would buy those Halloween costumes in the boxes, and they were plastic. Probably, very dangerous, really. You light a match, the whole thing goes up. But you'd have the masks and I wasn't really impressed with those costumes as a child, but I think that as an adult, I still like to go to Halloween parties. And I think my all-time favorite Halloween costume is one that I wore last year. I was a Gothic Louis the 14th.
I remember that
That
one.
was,
I see
that
why
was a
it
lot
was
of
your
fun.
favorite.
Yeah.
Gosh, anything French I would love. I've never done that though. I've never dressed up as a, no, that's not true. I was Valentine in the Count of Monte Cristo. My mother made my costume, and that must have been 7th grade. So I just didn't think about that. I was Sully one year, so that's an adult thing too.
Hmm.
Um, um, because my son was Buddy and I was Sully. So it
I
was
like
fun.
that.
Um, so let me check one more time to see if we have more questions. We're winding down. I don't think we do, but hold on a minute. Susan says that was very helpful. I learn a lot from overheard dialogue as well, and character names sometimes as well.
So
Okay.
so do I know that Susan who's watching?
No, well, maybe, because who knows? But Susan Mineta, she lives in the same area as me.
Oh, okay. Well, hello, Susan.
Yeah, it's really good of her to come. Thank you so much. And everybody, you can post questions and comments on the replay. Since people have been out and about, Robert, I get less people here on lives, but I get lots of views. So there may be some comments and
Sure.
questions coming up. And one more screen and then I'm done. I would really like to tell everybody to please, please, please go on Easter Seals and see some of those stories, because they'll touch your heart. And I have a feeling Robert has something to do with them. So your day job is probably stories too. So let me end with an excerpt of my Teabag Wisdom. Everybody, let me bring it a little closer. Such a gorgeous cover.
Thank you.
And it reflects the book too. I'm reading from page 146 into page 147, just a few paragraphs. It's the fire scene, but I'm not reading the whole thing. I'm not giving anything away.
No one's ever read that. I've not read that, so it'll be fun to hear you read it.
It ends with Annalise praying, "Dear God, please make Marlissa Mayfield invite me to her party. I promise I won't ask for anything else. Not ever." I lay there listening to Adame's puppy dog breathing, her fingers loosening their grip as she drifted off to sleep. "And dear God, can you make it one of those special invitations like the one Virginia Fenton got?" You see. Mama screamed, the awful sound slicing open the night, ripping us from sleep. "What's wrong?" Adame panted, pushing herself against me. Mama's voice pealed in the darkness. "Fire!" My heart beat in my chest like a fist. I reached for Adame, pulling her across the bed and onto the floor. I prepared myself for smoke and flame, pushing Adame a safe distance behind me. The white of Mama's nightgown helped me find her in the darkness. She tripped, bumping into the walls, her arms flailing around. "Mama, Mama, we're here," I screamed, grabbing a hold of her gown. Her pace so quick and fierce, she pulled me into the door frame, forcing me to turn loose. Miss Wessie ran behind Mama, bare feet slapping the floor. "Grace," she yelled, "ain't no fire in here." I took hold of Adame's hand, pulling her behind me into the parlor. Mama spun about the room, her eyes open and wide with terror. She coughed and gasped for air. "Help me." "What's wrong with Mama?" Miss Wessie stood close to Mama as she could get, her palms reaching out, careful not to touch. Miss Wessie glanced back at me. She's stuck in a dream. So it's not exactly the fire scene.
Right.
That I just thought that was, first of all, such effective use of language, such effective use of foreshadowing, and such a wonderful way of depicting the dynamic of this family, right? And their gifts, their supernatural gifts. Any comments?
No, I love that particular scene. I remember writing it, and I remember yeah, with great intention. I knew what I'd hoped to accomplish with that.
Well,
You're right.
you
It is
certainly did. You
Thank
did,
you.
because I was ready for the fire. Oh, sorry, everybody. There's a fire.
There will be
I don't think I'm telling anything.
something's going to catch on fire.
It's not what you think it is, though.
Right.
So, I don't think I gave anything away there.
No.
So any final words about the cicada tree, or writing in general, or craft in general, or anything I've missed, Robert?
No, I'm just grateful to have this opportunity to sit down and talk with you about writing and about the cicada tree. It's been a lovely experience. I've really enjoyed this year. You know, the book officially came out in February, and it's so much fun to have an opportunity to engage with readers.
Mhm.
We spend so much of our time isolated when we're writing. And so to know and to be able to actually connect with individuals who've been kind enough to buy your book and then to take the time to read it and then to actually show up at an event or online to have a conversation with you about your book, it makes it all worth it in the end.
That's who we write for, right?
Yes.
It's our readers, and, um, to be able to meet them is just the greatest honor in the world, I think. Um, and this is just the beginning for you. I know that for sure. And I always share my tea bag wisdom. This one is, I think this is about you, um, because of your sitting and listening to conversations. The one who listens understands.
Mm,
And I want to add to that, the one who listens writes really great dialogue.
I like that.
Uh, they usually apply to whoever I pull them for. And Yogi T and I think introverts write really good dialogue if they're writers because they are listening more than they're speaking. Um, so thank you if you're watching this now or later. I want to thank Robert Gwaltney. I'm honored to have him on. We've been planning this a while. I knew his book would be well received, but it's even more exciting being able to talk about it at this phase of its journey. Um, Thank you, Robert. You can join me every third Thursday at my Facebook page, interviewing authors like Robert. We're broadcasting live today, but if an author's schedule precludes them being live, which is happening because of being out and about these days, I'll be here live when the video plays and I can answer any questions or comments live. But that doesn't mean if it's a replay, you can't comment. I check my page, I check my comments. You can find all my interviews archived on my YouTube and Facebook page, and you can find more about Robert and his writing, including that great interview I mentioned at the beginning, at Robert L as in lion, Gwaltney, GWALTNEY.com. I got it right.
Mhm.
Um, .com, and you can find more about me at shoresofoursouls.com, at least for the moment. I've got a platform coming, guys, and ground1one coaching.com. Next month, we'll have Suzanne Kamada, author of The Baseball Widow, and we're going to talk about writing, but also being in bicultural relationships and life overseas, in this case, Japan, and being part of a multicultural family. The joys and the challenges will be live. And until then, this is Kathy Ramsperger bidding you a happy Halloween with lots of treats and no tricks, holding a great book. Maybe one of the treats will be a great book. Happy Halloween, happy reading. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you, Kathy.
Bye for now.